Welcome to Funnel Reboot, the podcast that shares ideas on how to upgrade your lead generation. Here is your host, Glenn Schmeltzley.
Hey, Glenn here. Today's episode is about making marketing decisions with data. But first, let me remind you that you can talk to me about any episode you've heard and what episodes you would like focused on in the future. Just reach out to me on social, or go to funnelreboot.com, or use the listener feedback line at 613-703-7073. I'd love to hear from you. So let's get to today's show. If you know me at all, you know that I believe that we can base all major marketing decisions we make on data. The concept isn't new to marketing. In fact, it's not new, period. But our cultural conversations have grown to include more data terms. Words like Moneyball and social graphs are now in our everyday vocabulary. One book that takes this data literacy concept into the day-to-day work of a marketer is Data First Marketing, which came out in 2020. Today's guest is the co-author of that book, and she brings over 20 years of search engine marketing experience to her agency, Marketing Mojo. She has spoken at search engine and marketing conferences, including Digital Summit, SMX Advanced, MarketingProfs B2B and Pubcon. She's also a frequent guest lecturer at the University of Virginia and James Madison University. Let's go now and hear from Janet Driscoll-Miller. I'm very glad to welcome Janet Driscoll-Miller. Welcome, Janet.
Thanks, Glenn. It's great to be here.
I'm really glad to have you. And we're here to talk about a book that you co-authored, and it is called Data First Marketing, and it came out at the end of 2021, correct?
End of 2020, actually. Yeah. So
Thank
it's
you
been
very
a little
much.
more than a year. Yeah.
Perfect. And you co-authored that book. Who did you write that with?
With an old friend, and she was formerly a client and came to work with me. We've worked together for many years. Her name is Julia Lim, and she's just a great person and really very knowledgeable from the client side, especially. So it's really great to have both of us. I come from the agency background. She comes more from the client side. So having both of us write the book together was, I feel like, really effective because we got both perspectives into it.
Yeah, and it feels very collaborative too. There's a lot of areas where you can sense who is speaking, and that you can get their, perspective from where they've had to either face challenges to defend certain decisions that are made, or
Yes.
that they have, decided that this is where they're going to be an intrapreneur and lead the charge within their company to get to a data first level, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And you say that the time is right for this. You describe the ages of marketing, and at the beginning of the book, you tell us that we're in the third age of the internet. Can you tell me a little bit about what you think has come about now that makes us stewards of the data first era?
Absolutely. So what we've seen, and I've been around in digital marketing since the early 2000s, and what we saw, as we saw this development in digital marketing in particular, we saw these, first of all, lots of new applications come out, lots of great things like tools like marketing automation coming out, and these are all great tools to help us as marketers do our job. But what was lacking, and I think what we're starting to see now, is a more analytical view of these tools. In the book, we mention, you probably have seen Chief Martech, Scott Brinker, who writes the Chief Martech blog, and he every year points out, or he puts together a piece where it has all of these different marketing tools, right? And every year that chart just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And so the challenge for marketers was finding the right tools. But now we're starting to see more consolidation and more integration than we ever have before with these tools. And in part because now that we have all these tools at our disposal, we need to be able to measure across all these tools. And so there's somewhat, we call it the age of reckoning. There's this is the time when we're starting to see some tools die off because they're not able to do all the things that they need to do to answer the questions of the organization. We're seeing mergers and acquisitions of these different tools, but we're also starting to see these tools having to become more responsible for providing really detailed analytics and attribution throughout the entire customer journey. And that's something that I feel like most of these tools are really starting to focus on finally, that maybe we didn't have before. And so that's where we find ourselves now, is in this age where there's consolidation in tools, and these tools are having to become more responsible for providing the data that we need as marketers to understand the contributions that we're making and how they are actually helping our companies.
Of course. My observation from my end is, of course, a word that will always make a marketer cringe is reporting. But,
Yes.
you know, I think we have lived through a pretty brutal era where we've had to go in on a monthly basis or quarterly and pull out of one tool the data that it was almost like it was an afterthought, right? I mean,
Yes.
the tool itself would be great at sucking the data in, but not so good at getting it back out to us. And if it did, it was only to like a human, like we would get a comma
Yes.
separated value flat file and we'd have to do something with it. But I think you're right. You talk about kind of this new age, this reckoning age. You talked about it starting in around 2009. And I think that's where we maybe started to see the tools starting to talk to each other, right? The APIs
Yes.
started to let them share. And
Mm.
there was a new word I think that entered marketing's lexicon, the stack, right? And
Yes.
that kind of tells me, okay, these are supposed to be used in an ensemble. It's not that I, as the human, I'm the cog in between each one of these gears. I have all of these, and I can make them work together. Is that what you're
Yes.
thinking?
Exactly, and we start to see tools like, I don't know if you're familiar with Zapier, we mentioned it in the book. It's
Yep.
one of my favorite tools because it's what the tool does is it takes APIs from these different platforms and makes it really user-friendly. You don't have to be a programmer anymore to know how to use, an API, and then to be able to integrate the different tools that you have. And so we started to see a birth of those types of tools out there that are helpful for marketers to be able to integrate all of these pieces together. And even like I use a tool called Supermetrics, which pulls in data from different tools into Google Sheets for me so I can create data studio visualizations and things like that. And so we're seeing a real growth in that area, and it's great for marketers because not every marketer is a programmer or even has access to a programmer or developer, and many times those developers have a full plate anyways. It's really difficult to get that development time and to get them to donate that time to marketing and give their time to marketing. And so the more that we as marketers can do on our own, it empowers us. It allows us to get the things done and integrate the tools we need and get the data we need without necessarily having to spend a lot of time with development.
Yep. Yep. Couldn't have said it better. The thing that we have to contend with though is there are some areas I think, and I think the book highlights them, where we marketers are maybe we've been a little bit misled or we've been relying on some old standby
Mm.
data that doesn't really help us today, or at least doesn't leverage this new data that's available when we share between systems. And the parallel that you keep drawing in the book is, of course, to the Oakland A's, which is, and I
Yes.
have it right in my hand,
The money ball.
Moneyball, right?
Yes.
You keep drawing these parallels where you're saying, all right, but what Billy Bean had to do before we could even start laying the groundwork and kind of maturing as a data organization is we had to scrap some stuff, right? What in your own thinking do marketers have to maybe consider scrapping, or what do they have to challenge within the walls of their own businesses or their clients' businesses before we can even get going on this?
Absolutely. I think, and sometimes we call them vanity metrics too. They make us feel good as marketers, like we've done a good job. But the reality is, stats like traffic, right? Traffic to your website doesn't really tell you a lot. I mean,
Right.
it's fine, to have as a metric, but it's not really the metric that's telling you whether or not marketing is driving revenue in your company and driving lead generation and driving, all the things that are goals for your company. Whatever that goal may be, if it's, hiring people, like right now we have a lot of clients who are saying, I need to focus on hiring good people. We have a hiring issue right now. So maybe it's that. Maybe the goal of the organization is of course revenue, which every organization generally cares about. But whatever that goal is, that's what we really care about, and we want to be able to measure to that. So traffic is really a very small part and a very small measurement of really where we're going with that. And it can be a KPI. It can give us some information, but it really isn't the measurement that we should be using. And I come from the world of SEO and digital advertising. And for years, that's what SEOs, are doing. Well, how much organic traffic are we sending to your website? Just because you're sending traffic to a website doesn't mean those people are taking the actions you want them to take on your website to become customers or whatever the goal is. Again, if it's maybe even job applicants. So whatever that goal is. And so I think a lot of folks still today, and I can say this is true for SEO, quite frankly, that a lot of SEOs I know just measure based on traffic. That's really not enough. It's
Yeah.
more than just people coming to your site. So it's things like that. It's also things like likes or shares or those types
Email
of basic
opens.
metrics. Right, like email opens, like, okay, great. But those are metrics we can still use in marketing, but they're not really telling us what we really need to know, which is what is our true impact? And that's ultimately what we want to find out.
You say that we need to maybe start at the other end or literally somewhere else in our company, like with the chief revenue officer, the chief information officer, or dare I even say, the chief financial officer. But if we get a conversation going with them, we understand well, we have to and ought to already understand what the goals of the company are. But if we ask them and get in a dialogue where we understand what data would show that marketing's doing its part to work towards those goals, that's when you say we're kind of getting more mature in our use of metrics, right?
That, and I think it gives the marketing department a lot more respect and admiration from the rest of the company. The challenge I think that a lot of marketing departments face, and I probably don't need to say, I think when I say this, everyone's going to relate to it. Oftentimes, the marketing department is not the most respected department in the entire company.
Yep.
And they're often looked upon as the people who do the fluffy, pretty things.
Yep.
and we're more than that. We're much more than that in marketing. We contribute so much more than making things pretty. And the challenge is getting that respect and getting a seat at the table, quite frankly, so that marketing can help drive what those goals should be. A good example of that is recently, I got a set of goals from a client for revenue goals. And I don't know who came up with these goals. They just kind of came up with goals. And thankfully, I was able to say, well, based on our historical data of how
Yep.
much revenue you've brought in, this is not a realistic goal, because you're like doubling the amount of revenue in 1 year. That's probably not going to be realistic.
Yeah.
And so we were able to have a conversation. But in order to have those meaningful conversations about setting those goals for the organization, you've got to have a seat at the table. And so we've got to be able to measure that kind of information that's so critical to the organization and understand it in order to be able to be respected and to get that seat at the table so that we can have those conversations with the C-suite, whether that's the CFO, the chief sales officer, chief revenue officer, whatever the title might be, and even the CEO, his or herself, to really make sure that we're having those conversations and we're helping guide the company, not just being told, this is what you need to do to execute and make our goals come true.
Yeah, that's an important point, because some people might take it as just being defensive, like, well, let's make sure that we get that goal knocked down so that it's something that we would very easily be able to hit. You're not
Right.
saying that. You're saying that when we engage in a conversation with them, we may even suggest a stretch goal ourselves, but we're doing it based on information. We know what levers to pull to get us within a shot of that number.
Exactly. And it's more helpful to be more realistic, with your goal, obviously, because if you're basing your goal off of something that is probably not achievable and your entire organization is planning out their budget based on that goal, that's going to be disastrous. You just don't want that to happen. So ultimately, we want to be realistic, and that data that we have access to as marketers can really help define what those goals should be. What type of work are you having done? Oh, your audio went out. Let me see. Your audio went out. Let me see if I can chat with you. How do I chat?
There,
There you go.
I'm back. Sorry. I was just saying, yeah, some drywall and framing. So a lot of cutting, but that's
Yeah.
okay. Should be nearly done. And I'm going to get to sales. I should have some elevator music for this, Janet.
Yeah. Da, da, da.
Oh. If it continues, I'll just ask them to do something else.
It's always one of the fun challenges of working from home.
It has been. Yeah, I've had, we're near the end of it, but during the lockdown, yes, quite interesting. Wife's a teacher, 3
Oh my
children between high school and university age. So, and, daddy was tech support, right?
Right, of course, yes. And then you have all your neighborhood noise. Like I was noticing,
Yep.
like, people would be out mowing their grass in the middle of the day, because they
Right.
could, Sometimes like, okay, I'm on a podcast or I'm recording a webinar.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're good now. Thanks so much for waiting. All right. Oh my goodness. All right, I'm just going to go ahead anyway. Yes, you were talking about the good times and bad times. And I think that the team that you talk about in the book that illustrates this perfectly is sales, and how this is what alignment really means. I mean, you deal with the fact that we're all affected by the psychology of when numbers are good and when numbers are bad. Salespeople are directly affected for it because their compensation is partly tied to it. But you try to say that you need to jointly plan and measure with sales for just this reason, right? It's going to have to make it through every month of that fiscal year, correct?
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things I have found quite often in working with different clients is that I find a lot of times sales organizations are reluctant to share their information back with marketing. So it seems to be a one way instead of a sync. And so what ends up happening is marketing shares leads and information with sales, but then sales doesn't always either update their records correctly or maybe update them at all inside of the CRM, or they won't necessarily sync back the sales information to marketing, which is really a challenge for marketers because we could make their lives better. We could make their lives easier if we had access to that data to understand what makes up a good customer. What platforms did we use? What channels, what campaigns worked best at driving the most revenue and the best opportunities? And that only makes the job of the salesperson easier. So a lot of times what I tell folks when I'm trying to get this sync to happen is I'll say to the marketing department, approach sales. As you said, sales is commissioned. So the easier we can make their lives to make more money, that's a good thing. And we just have to frame our argument in the right way so that we can start to help get them to give us that data back and sync it back to us so we can start to run reports and understand which campaigns were really effective at driving the right types of customers for us and the best customers. It makes us better as a marketing department and it helps them. So making that argument's key.
Yeah, I don't think there's malice in most places. It's more just that marketing's ignored, and that marketers need to have the words or the ideas that will make a salesperson perk up and listen,
Yes.
you gave two beautiful examples. You said, if marketing were to walk over to sales and say, we're interested in you sharing with us some of the emails that you send out, and we would like to see if they look at all like the emails that that same prospect is receiving from us.
Right.
Another one you gave was marketing could ask to co-create ABM lists with sales, right? These are, when you say these things, a salesperson, this is what they live and breathe. And if you engage them on their terms, then you can tie back to what is going to make you better, right? I mean, because this is a feedback loop, right?
Exactly. And I think that's a really good example of the ABM stuff, the account-based marketing. As marketers, how are we deciding what accounts to go after? That's really a sales conversation. What are the companies, what are the organizations that sales wants to approach? How can we support that effort? How can we make sure that we're getting our brand and our products and our services in front of those people to make that sales process easier when that salesperson picks up the phone and calls that account or calls, that company, so that the company already knows who our brand is, already kind of has some basic understanding. It makes that salesperson's job so much easier. So we've got to work in tandem with sales. I mean, it's hard because, as you said, I think sometimes, again, not malice, but sales may not think that it's important to coordinate with marketing. But it
They're
truly
they're
is.
in they're in the moment, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And yet, I the irony isn't lost on me that what marketing is really trying to do is just let sales picture a future where things get easier, things get better.
Right.
This sounds a lot like the kind of stuff that marketers do all day when they're describing to an end customer why you should buy a certain product or service.
Right. And we're marketers, we're good
And
at
we're
this.
marketers.
We can persuade people. Let's go in and persuade sales.
And you give a way for us to, rate ourselves, an assessment that,
Yes.
can get us there. We now that we kind of know where it would take us and where it would take the rest of our organization, let's dig into some of the things that we have to consider on a more technical level. You talk about the fact that we've got to wrap our head around the fact that there's two different kinds of metrics, and that we have to work with both of them, and that neither of them should have all the sway in what we're doing. Can you take us through volume metrics and value metrics?
Yeah. So value metrics are the ones that we measure towards our ultimate goal for our organization, like things like the revenue and so forth. Volume metrics are more about trying to increase the visibility. And so again, when I talked about traffic before, that's a volume metric. And so it's an indicator that we're getting people to our site, but it doesn't tell us from a value perspective how valuable those people are. As an example, you have a lot of traffic coming to your site. Do you know how many of them are prospects? Do you know how many of them? I work with some SaaS companies. How many of them are existing users, right?
Yeah.
Versus prospects. So trying to figure that out is really difficult by just a traffic number. And so that's really more of the volume metric. Value metrics are going to be things like revenue, number of leads generated, marketing qualified leads, sales qualified leads. They go beyond just the initial lead sign up. And that's really critical. I always tell folks too, like those value metrics are critical when you're thinking about things like paid advertising, when you're talking about search advertising or display advertising. What we want to understand is more than just the initial conversion, right? Yeah, somebody signed up on our lead gen form, but do we know that they were valuable? We don't know. You have to go beyond that initial conversion and see, did that person pan out? Did they become an opportunity? Were they qualified? That helps define for us if our campaigns are actually driving the right types of customers. That's what value metrics really are.
Great. So those metrics are strewn about in a number of places,
Yeah.
and you take us through something that's rather elementary, but something that's really important in the book. If we're going to try and understand how we're going to make use of this data, we first have to understand what data we have.
Yeah.
So, can you take us through how we're going to inventory our data and how we're going to lay the foundation for eventually becoming data driven?
Absolutely. So the first thing you have to know is what is it I really want to know, right? What's the outcome? What do I really want to understand? What kind of information do I want to get? And from there, you have to say to yourself, well, what data gives me that information, that education of what's going on? And once you know which data pieces you need, you'll realize immediately as a marketer, you don't own all those things. Like, for instance, as an example, you probably as a marketer don't own the system that tells you how much revenue we generated. If you are doing lead generation marketing, that may not be in your marketing automation tool. It may not be, again, syncing back, and you may not know those deals and values. So you may need to be able to tap into something like the accounting system, or you may need to be able to tap into the CRM. You're definitely going to need access to CRM data, which is usually sales data. Um, to find out things like how many opportunities were generated from that campaign, or how many closed won versus closed lost deals came from those campaigns that you generated. So, first think about what are the outcomes? What do I want to know about this campaign? What do I want to be able to define and understand? Then figure out what the data is, and then you've got to map that to where the data lives, because you probably do not have access as a marketer to all those pieces. And understanding who has it and then approaching them to ask them for that data sharing is very important. That's how you become a data first organization, when you have access to the data points that you need so that you can make informed decisions about which campaigns and efforts are working best, so you can put more investment into those or new campaigns that are like them.
And if we are a company who's only dipping our toes in this, we're probably, when we ask for that data from another group, getting a static report, um, maybe even a spreadsheet that is, from the previous quarter or
Right.
some other historical time period. Um, is that our end goal, or are we trying to get into a more of a dynamic uh, pulling of this data where we will be able to ask questions of it on demand?
Ultimately, you'd wanna get to the dynamic data. But as you said, and sometimes it has to do with, privacy concerns, depends on the type of organization you're in. Like,
Yep.
we've worked with organizations like health insurance companies and so forth that don't want to push that data, all of the data back. So there's definitely some privacy concerns in certain organizations, there's
Yes.
security concerns. So you may not ever get to fully dynamic data. That may be a reality for some organizations, and that's okay, because the more data you can get, the better. But if you can't get to the optimal of dynamic, it's okay if you get some static data too. But ideally, as you said, like, it'd be great for us to be able to pull information on demand. That's really the ultimate. Sort of the utopia for marketing and with data, is to be able to have access at any time to slice and dice and run reports and create visualizations to understand that data um, on demand as we like. And to create things like dashboards that help us to visualize that data and see changes in a more real-time aspect as much as we can. Because of course, if you run a campaign and then you wait 3 months, like a whole quarter, to get the results, what if that campaign was a total flop? Wouldn't you rather know that in the first couple weeks so that you could actually just kill it off and put that money somewhere else? Uh, Obviously, you would. So it's more effective to have dynamic. But if you can't, like I said, some organizations just may not be able to get there, and that's okay. More data is better, no matter if it has to be static or if it can be dynamic.
Perfect. And something else the book raises is that sometimes there's going to need to be some small tweaks to what information a system is going to have, because, of course, if you're going to tie it back to another system, there's got to be some common fields where it can understand, apples to apples. So
Exactly.
it might be let's say, the identifier for the prospect, or the account for the prospect. And we're going to have to see if this information can be shared with downstream applications so that when it comes time to bring them together, it's easy to match.
One of the more common missteps I see folks make, as an example in that particular area, is leads versus opportunities. So leads are individual people, right?
Yes.
Opportunities are companies. right? Or divisions in companies and things like
Yep.
that. So a person is not an opportunity in a lead generation situation. And you may have multiple contacts that are under that opportunity. And so this is where it's really critical to make sure that from the sales side, any communication, both sales and marketing, that they're doing with those individual contacts and the multiple contacts that could eventually be associated with an opportunity, that we're tracking all of that. Because in some cases, as an example, you might sell. I had a client that sold software that HR groups would use, like HR departments.
Uh-huh.
But the HR department isn't the final say on purchasing that software. The
Right.
IT department is also involved. So you've got contacts in both areas that have to influence that opportunity. And so it's really critical that those two contacts or leads are associated with that opportunity, and we track everything we do with it, so we really understand, like, okay, we sent an email to the HR person, the IT person responded through an ad, and we marry all that together because all of it was influencing that sale.
Yeah, and here's a really interesting case where sometimes through the course of putting the data together, you're discovering ways that your company could be better organized. I mean, I would shudder to think
Yeah.
that you have a person talking to the IT department in an account and then somebody
Yeah.
else over talking to the HR lead, and they're not tied together at the vendor's company as one opportunity.
Right.
And marketing has a role to play to perhaps point out these
Yes.
things and say, hey guys, first off, here's where you go to put that information. But second off, if you go fill it in, here's some of the good things that, might come of it. We may not have a left hand, right hand problem.
Yes.
We may be able to look more on top of our game compared to our competitor, and we might win the deal because we have better data.
I can't tell you, even just as an individual, as a business person myself, and being a lead myself, I can't tell you how many times I've seen those mistakes where
Yeah.
where the sales team has contacted me and the marketing team has contacted me, and the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing, and unfortunately, or I'm a current customer, and the marketing
Yikes.
department says, "Hey, you're a new lead," and I'm like, "No, I'm not a new lead. I've been your customer for 10 years," right? Those types of rookie mistakes, it's embarrassing, frankly, for a company to have to deal with that. And to look like we don't have our act together. We aren't organized. So that's another reason that data flow back from sales is important, so that we are all on the same page and we understand how much we're communicating and who we're communicating with, and who's going to do that communication. Is it going to be sales? Is it going to be marketing? What are we going to send? And we don't overwhelm the person with too much communication also.
Yeah, very true. So I'm going to maybe flip over to devil's advocate for a second here. And we've talked about, why it's good to be coordinating these systems, having them integrated with each other. But are there times where we can maybe push it too far, or are there times where we just need to admit that there are going to be things that we don't have all the data on, and
Yeah.
we can't be categorical in how we think of it. We can't know for sure that having a high organic rank meant that somebody found our site by Googling it, and that's why we have this new customer. There are limits, right? And we're
There
living
are
in an
definite
age of
limits.
privacy. So
Yes. Definitely limits, and privacy is a big part of it. The other challenge that a lot of companies face right now, although there are some ways to overcome this, depending on the type of company you are, cross device, right? That's a huge problem right now. So, some things do help that. Like, for instance, I've been talking recently about in Google Analytics. If you have user IDs enabled on your site, let's say you're a SaaS company, or like I have an e-commerce company I work with that you have to have an account to log
yep.
in. You can do cross-device tracking with those logins. That's definitely a challenge a lot of marketers are facing right now, because I might come to the site right now through my desktop because I'm at work, but later on I'm going to come through my phone, and I look like two different people in Google Analytics, So and so what is the attribution for me? If I end up becoming a lead, Should it be the first touch thing that I did on the desktop? Should it be the last touch thing I did on my phone? I mean, that's a real challenge. And attribution, we talk about attribution in the book and finding the right model for you, because that is definitely a challenge to have the right attribution model. But also, and ultimately, you really want to get to a multi-touch attribution situation, but that is very complicated and it's not an exact science. And just like what I was talking about with the cross device situation, you may not be capturing everything. And that's really challenging. So, yes, at some point, I do think that you have to at some point just say, this is the best data I can get. And I feel confident in the data I have that it's correct as can be. But maybe I don't have access to all the data I need. Maybe I have some limitations on the data that I can get to, whatever that is. And just accept that and do the best you can with the data you have. And that's what we talk about. We have a maturity model in the book, and kind of like growing from where are you today? There's an assessment. Where are you today? And growing to like the ultimate data first marketing organization. And I can say that in my I've been at my agency 17 years. In the 17 years I've run the agency, no one is at the top of the data first marketing model.
Right.
No
Right.
one is.
It's
So you don't
aspirational.
It's aspirational. Yes, absolutely. And so you don't have to feel like I'm not there. It's just really tough. It's a hard hill to climb, one step at a time. And the closer you get, the more good data you're going to have to make those informed decisions as a marketer. And that's really ultimately our goal is let's keep moving along the path and getting better at it every day. Don't feel like you got to, throw in the towel. It's so difficult. I don't know how to do it. Just every day make a little bit of progress towards becoming more data first driven.
And the thing that I've found is that even if you're not near the top, at each step that you're going up that scale, you are getting more information. And I think it's also fair to say that even though you're showing more data to other people, that part of the maturity is also sharing those disclaimers that you said, that we may not know cross-device attribution, we may not know this, know that. And that's important for setting expectations so that people don't, say, well, you said, this
Yes.
was, X.
Yes.
One of the things, and I believe it's in a section that Julia wrote, is that a real benefit that will absolutely make people's eyes pop is when you can take two fields of information, one from, let's say, a system higher up in the funnel, and another one from a system lower where we understand more of what happened over time, and you make a ratio of those two numbers. And I think that that's a beautiful way. It kind of it like slices that Gordian knot of, we don't have to worry too much about privacy because we're dealing in aggregates, and we don't have to worry about giving people like, this is not walking into the CFO's office and saying, you're going to make this much money this quarter. But a ratio gives everybody, at least in a directional sense, a feel for how well we're doing, right?
Yeah. A feel for it, but not an exact number to say we're expecting X dollars in revenue. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And so it can help them understand this is the return we expect to get.
So Janet, there's a lot of information in the book, and I'm just interested in knowing, where would people go if they're going to find out more about it or about yourself and your agency?
Well, thank you. You can order the book on Amazon. It's available on Amazon and a couple of other platforms as well. We have a website dedicated to the book also, I believe it's data-firstmarketing.com. And you can go there and take a mini assessment as well if you want to kind of see how you're doing in your organization. But the full assessment is in the book. But you can read more about the book there. And also with the agency, my agency is Marketing Mojo. We've been in business for 17 years. We specialize in SEO, digital advertising, and analytics, and really all the things we talked about. This book was really written based on our experiences and how we've run campaigns and what we've learned over the years. And we tried to share a lot of customer experiences, like really real life experiences where we've seen, and these are everybody from a very small startup company to large enterprise corporations that we've worked with that have seen these problems. So it's not unique to you. I think everyone may feel like, gosh, has anyone ever gone through this before? They have. And also, I wanted to let everyone know that they can get enter for a free copy of the book from this podcast if they would like to enter that drawing. If they go to marketing-mojo.com/Funnel Reboot, one word, Funnel Reboot for the name of the
Fantastic.
podcast. And if you go there, you can enter to a drawing, and I'll be sending out a free book. So hopefully everybody will go and get a copy or check out the mini assessment and see how you're ranking today, what your company is, where your company's at, and where you need to go.
And I hope they do. And thank you very much for that offer. We'll include that in the show notes as well. And I'll just finish by underlining your point. We're all still figuring this out. We're still relatively new. And the amount of work that has to be done is probably, the majority of it is still ahead of us. But as long as we keep working at it, we're going to be taking our organizations in the right direction.
Exactly.
So to the listener, I just want to say thanks, and I hope you've gotten value out of what Janet has shared. And I hope that you take something out of this conversation to make your funnel even better.
Thanks for listening. Follow the show on Twitter @Funnel Reboot. If you like what you have heard today, please consider leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts.